talk, and thank you for your patience while we worked on the glare. I'm Kate Supron. I am very privileged to be the mayor of this fine village during its centennial, the year we celebrate its centennial. This presentation today by our village historian, Dee Zeckley, and our deputy village historian, Pat Longoria, is the capstone culminating event for the village's celebration and recognition of its centennial. The topic of the talk today is Before the Village, and it will look back to, as indicated by the title, to what was happening in the village before the village, from roughly 1800 up until the village's founding in 1900, beginning with, I believe, the territory, which was in the territory of the Cayuga Indians. I know that we're all going to enjoy learning about that today. If you haven't walked through the building, please feel free to do so after the event today. And either today or another day, if you haven't seen this fabulous exhibit of Jack Lambert's drawings of scenes throughout the village, we welcome you to take the time either today or in the future to come back and look at those. Also, the exhibit, I would give credit to our two village historians and our village historic preservationists. In the back of the room by the window, we have Carol Schiffman and Randy K. Becks. So thank you to you, our fine Village History Committee, for today's events and for a wonderful celebration of the village's centennial throughout the year. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Kate. If anybody can't hear me in the back of the room, please put your hand up. But I'm used to holding forth at this table, having done so for 5 years. So I think I'll be okay, but do let me know, please. It's delightful to have had the mayor here today. I like to think, as your historian, that the Village Centennial has been an opportunity to bring attention to our community, to enhance a sense of place, to know where we live. And the mayor is an active and terrific public servant, and she and the Board of Trustees have been enormously supportive of this whole project since last winter, so thanks very much to them. Many of you who are here this afternoon, I'm sure, attended the talk by former village historian and author Carol Sisler on the architectural history of Cayuga Heights that kicked off the celebration in February. I have some books here this afternoon, the secondary sources that I will be alluding to and that Pat has been working with me. The first on the left is Enterprising Families. That is a almost pristine copy. My working copy has been rebound at Ridley's and is totally marked up. We stand on Carol Sisler's shoulders in anything that we do on the history of Cayuga Heights and are enormously grateful to her. I hope you also attended the talk by Village Planning Board Chair Fred Cowett on the natural history of Cayuga Heights, which provided nifty background for the geographical and topographical references that we'll be taking up this afternoon. I'm sorry. Happens to the best of families.
It wasn't the kids, so we're fine.
And perhaps you attended the panel at Kendall in April, chaired by Ralph Janis, with Allison Schull and Steve Flash, sharing memories of growing up here. As I look around the room today, I see an enormous number of people whom I've known with varying associations. The parents of our former babysitters comes to mind, first and foremost. The house tour on June 13th, a day after the actual centennial anniversary of the legal incorporation of the village of Cayuga Heights in the state of New York on June 12th in 1915, was a blockbuster. Thanks again to Christine O'Malley, Preservation Services Coordinator at Historic Ithaca, shown in this slide, for her role in producing the tour. Special thanks as well to the village staff, especially our clerk and treasurer, Joan Mangione. Two publications, The History of or the story of Marcham Hall, the building where you are sitting today. You're in the studio of Dorothy Cornell, Ezra's youngest granddaughter, by myself, and Pat's fantastic first ever history of the street names of the village, which takes you in a linear direction right through from the first properties that we'll be talking about this afternoon. They're for sale this afternoon at $1 a piece. No credit cards, please. Also, by way of introduction, can't do this often enough, Carol Schiffman and Randy Kepex, historic preservationists of Cayuga Heights, join in welcoming you. I hope you know them already as the creators of the Cayuga Heights History Project, a truly groundbreaking effort collecting village history on the web with great stories of the houses, neighborhoods, past residents, and much more. And I would acknowledge Randy's husband, Paul Anderson, who is taping us today and who is working very hard at the mapping project that is part of the Village History website. What follows today is the first half of the two-part backstory to the history of Cayuga Heights, the presence of the Cayuga people here before the American Revolution, and the farm settlement in the 19th century. Pat and I hope this won't disappoint those of you expecting a quick leap into the 20th century, the land development by Jared Newman and Charles Blood that culminated in the creation of the village in 1915, the establishment of our village government and community before World War II, enlargement by annexation in the post-war period, the maturation of the village under Mayor Marcham's leadership from the late 1950s through the 1980s, and some high points of what's happened since then. Don't worry, that is yet to come. We think you'll find this story of the early foundations of the village, which has never been told before, full of surprises and an interesting one. So let's say goodbye for now to Cayuga Heights, as shown here in a map that was once available at Mayor's Smoke Shop downtown, dating to 1938. When Hubert Baxter, professor of architecture at Cornell, who lived at 119 East Upland Road and is buried in Pleasant Grove Cemetery, was mayor. We'll get back to it, I promise. You're invited with Pat and me this afternoon to travel farther back in time. We're going to outline for you the story of woodland slopes and upland farms that were here before Cayuga Heights became a suburb, brought to life in photos and maps, researched and prepared by Pat that are quite phenomenal. And we'll be happy to take your questions as we roll along, in case anybody starts talking too much, in which case we'll cut you off and we'll get back to it anyway. To begin at the beginning, there is no evidence that during several centuries of habitation in the Ithaca area, the Cayuga Nation of the Haudenosaunee, or Iroquois people, ever settled on the densely wooded plateau above the southeast end of Cayuga Lake, where Cayuga Heights is located. More permanent settlements of the Cayugas were concentrated at the north end of the lake, where the fishing and soil was better, and there was access to the Seneca River for travel eastward to the Mohawk Valley and beyond. Apparently, such settlement as did exist at the south end was concentrated down on the flat land around the head of the lake and the inlet. A section of a trail system on the east side of the lake, if one really existed, as described by European explorers and missionaries, did not reach the higher land of Cayuga Heights. The closest the trail may have come was where it passed, as described by W. Glenn Norris, former county historian, in Old Indian Trails in Tompkins County. The closest it came was coming by an old Indian spring at the base of Renwick Heights, then around the sandy bluff at Lakeview Cemetery and on to Fall Creek. There is sufficient archaeological evidence, however, to believe that during the Sullivan campaign of the American Revolution, during the fall of 1779, when colonial forces under the command of Colonel William Butler destroyed their villages in retribution for siding with the British, the Cayugas hunted and camped in the Cayuga Heights vicinity. I assume you know there outlines the story of the Sullivan campaign. It was Butler's forces who took on the east side of the lake where we live. Now, it may seem ironic, given the current controversy, well, no longer controversy, but given the controversy centuries later, that deer hunting was one of the earliest human activities in the area. But so it was. Just outside the village boundary today, off Cayuga Heights Road, at 105 Needham Place, where Professor of Entomology James George Needham built a house in 1907, a deep glen was reportedly favored as a campsite by the native people because of the fresh spring water to be had there, as well as plant material suitable for basket making. They may have reached the site on paths that ran up from lakefront settlements alongside the many brooks and streams the hillside is riven with. And you know about the brooks and streams yourselves. Thanks to Nancy Mead, the current owner, for sharing historical documentation of the glen with us. Professor Needham, by the way, created a nature preserve there on his property overlooking the glen, where the likes of Liberty Hyde Bailey came and lectured to gatherings of students and faculty colleagues. Fast forward, and late 20th century residents in Cayuga Heights could be proud that a chief of the Cayuga Nation and major supporter of the American Indian program at Cornell was their neighbor. Today it is hard to find any echoes of the tribe's presence in the village so long ago, other than on a few street signs with Iroquois and Cayuga in their names. The hundreds of white pines on the parkway, however, are evocative because the needles grow in groups of 5. Equaling, I was told by a naturalist at the plantations, in the number of the original confederated tribes of the Iroquois Confederacy. After the Revolution, the 1,164 acres that would someday become the village you know as Cayuga Heights fell within the military tract of central New York. The military tract was the enormous expanse of over 1,800,000 acres that the government, lacking funds to pay for their service, divided into 28 townships and then subdivided into 100 600-acre rectilineal lots awarded to individual veterans with special lots set aside for churches and schools. A tiny piece of the military tract that one day would become part of Cayuga Heights included portions of lots 88, 89, and 90 in Township 22, Ulysses. The classical names in the military tract were, it is now thought, citing a very fine 1989 Syracuse historical geography dissertation on the tract. They were assigned by land commissioners in the state government. In the drawing of lots on July 9, 1790, by which they were apportioned, Lot 88 was drawn by Andrew Moody, a captain in the 2nd New York Artillery Regiment, 89 by Corporal Lancaster Lighthall of New York's 2nd Company, 1st Regiment, and 90 by David Risley, a matros or gunner's mate, who also served in the 2nd New York Artillery Regiment. Now, although the distribution of land in the military tract did meet the goal of establishing farm communities on what was then the frontier of New York State, many of the original recipients never farmed the lots they were given. During the 7 years between the Treaty of Paris in 1783 and the drawing of lots 7 years later, much land speculation took place. Many veterans simply grew tired of waiting and sold off their claims. Very few former soldiers actually settled, and lots 88, 89, and 90 in the township of Ulysses were no exception. They were never farmed by Moody, Lighthall, or Risley. Thanks to Bob Kibbe, retired map librarian in Olin Library at Cornell and a board member of the History Center in Tompkins County, we have the original descriptions of the land, where many of you are living today, in lots 88, 89, and 90, from the field notes of the surveyors who worked for the state under the direction of Moses DeWitt, a young cousin of New York State Surveyor General and Ithaca founder Simeon DeWitt. The notes were transcribed from the originals in Albany by Emeritus Professor of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology at Cornell, Peter Marks, whose publications include a guide to plant communities of the Finger Lakes region in 2006. Professor Marks deciphered and recorded the notes, and his wife, Beth Hedlund Marks, typed them all up on a typewriter. You can find the survey maps and field notes on microfilm at Olin, and there's also a report that they prepared in 1992 for the State Museum in Albany. Noting a few highlights of what the surveyors found as they marked out the boundaries of the military lots should sound very familiar to anyone living on a little piece of one of the three lots more than 200 years hence. In Lot 88, reaching down to the lake, they found a horse or cart road, likely the forerunner of East Shore Drive, and portions of the brooks that became known as Renwick and Pleasant Grove. The land they judged to be mostly, quote, poor, broken land, covered chiefly with oak. It's labeled 1 on the map. But in upland land areas, some good land for wheat, labeled 2 on the map. Of interest, one surveyor noted that inhabitants were already referring to Fall Creek by name. Since then it had displaced the Cayuga's name, which is something like Malgoani, but I don't pretend to be able to render that properly. I wish I could. The northern edge of Lot 89, it's number 1 up there, met the southern reach of Township 17 Milton, now the southern border of Lansing. Going east from the lake toward the northern boundary of Lot 89, along the northern boundary of Lot 89, was land rising gradually and pretty good, timbered chiefly with oak. Number 1 on the map. The southern boundary of Lot 89, in the more eastern reach of the 1.8 square miles taken up by Cayuga Heights today, was timbered with white pine, labeled 2. This confirms what people like Fred Cowett have mentioned often, that the eastern white pine, Pinus strobus, is a native plant here long before Jared Newman's landscape architect, Harold Caparn, made them the centerpiece of his planting design on the parkway and surroundings. Military Lot 90 contained rough, poor land, timbered chiefly with oak and white pine, again confirming what Fred Cowett said about the soil and mixed deciduous forest cover in his talk in February. Renwick and Pleasant Grove brooks continued on, flowing westerly downhill from Lot 90. You could compare the military lot with a fine description of our ecology currently and our open space in the village's comprehensive plan, where I can quote, nearly half of the community today lives in the upland or eastern part of Cayuga Heights, that is to say, not on the steep sloping land that way, but up here. Our thanks to Donna Eschenbrenner, archivist of the History Center, for her consultation and guidance in making such materials as a copy of Moses DeWitt 1790 Township of Ulysses map available to us. In December 1790, Captain Moody sold Lot 88, part of which was located on this relatively steep west-facing slope above Cayuga Lake. That was, as the surveyor's observations suggested would be the case, difficult to farm. Citing the Cayuga Heights Comprehensive Plan again, the western side of the village is where about a quarter of the population lives today. The slopes there vary from 7 to 15%, and as many of you know, we are about 400 feet up above the lake. The buyer in 1790 was James Renwick of New York City, whose family would occupy at least a part of Lot 88, known as the Renwick Tract, for 100 years. And that's the family, of course, that developed Renwick Park, later Stewart Park. According to the list recording lot distribution in the balloting book, instead of Lighthall and Risley, the patent or deed to whom delivered for tract 89 was one Solomon Levy, and for 90, a Captain William Jackson, either of whom could have purchased the lot or been the heir, executor, or administrator of an estate. These two lots, 89 and 90, lay on most of the higher and relatively flatter ground, more promising overall for farming than Lot 88. In time, new owners bought property on all three lots, chopped down hundreds of trees, pulled out stumps, and plowed new fields, thereby converting the woodland into farms. This is the first land use conversion on the land of Cayuga Heights. Most of the pioneers didn't clear all 600 acres in any single lot. They were divided up. Reliable estimates conclude that on average it took an individual a year to clear 5 to 8 acres, or a family working together a year to clear 20. It's not quite the leaf raking that was going on here. It does make you stop and think. That's me. The period of settlement on the post-revolutionary frontier of the military tract was one of constantly shifting town and county boundaries. Ulysses Township started out in 1794 within Onondaga County. It became part of Cayuga County when the map was redrawn in 1799, then part of Seneca County in 1804, and finally Tompkins County when it was created in April 1817 and named for Daniel Tompkins, then governor of New York. Along with the land from the section of Seneca County where military lots 88, 89, and 90 had most recently been located, Tompkins County was also given a portion of Cayuga County that lay in the present-day towns of Dryden, Groton, and Lansing, and 5 years later, a portion of Tioga County in the towns of Caroline, Danby, and Newfield. And we will get these slides up on our website at some point for you to study before there's an exam. In 1821, the town of Ithaca was carved out of Ulysses Township in an area taking up 36 of the 560 square miles in Tompkins County on the 3 hills that loop around the east, south, and west side of Cayuga Lake. The village of Ithaca, down near the south end of the lake, was designated the county seat. The village of Ithaca became the city of Ithaca in 1888. Establishment of the town of Ithaca in 1821 set in place the municipality within which the village of Cayuga Heights would be founded a century on. Like the rest of Tompkins County, during the 19th century, almost all the land in the town of Ithaca was farmed. 8/10 according to one standard source. Excuse me. Between 1836 and 1890, the town population doubled from roughly 6 to 12,000. There was a cluster of farms in a hamlet within the town of Ithaca, here at Community Corners in the future Cayuga Heights by the end of the Civil War. Likely the homes of not much more than 100 people. Pat's map, this is really brilliant, first rendering. Nobody has ever done this before.
This is just a draft.
Pat didn't want to use this. She wanted to use something from a book that was historic, but it was much messier. What she has done is shown you where Lot 89 is, where Lot 88 is, and where Lot 90 is. And she has superimposed on it the first sort of roads in our area. And underneath are all the streets. So you can, when we get this up on the web, or today if you're possibly able to see it, you can identify where you fell, where your land, where you live today, fell within the story that we're telling. It is quite something that she was able to do this, if I may say so, and I am. So Pat's map shows more than a dozen farmhouses near where we are gathered, near where you're sitting right now today, well within a mile of the junction of Pleasant Grove, North Trip Hammer and Hanshaw Roads, as well as a portion of Klein Road that is no longer in existence. Klein Road much of it was renamed Pleasant Grove Road, and there was a piece that went back through where the corner shopping center is over there, and down behind Sheldon Road, and hooked up across Highland. I keep pointing, it's my way. And hooked up with what you know as Klein Road from the intersection with Highland Road. So don't be confused, but that's, yes.
Was Oak Hill Road part of that?
No, this is before Oak Hill Road. This is that, and the reason why that piece of Klein Road no longer exists today is because when it came time to lay out Cayuga Heights, this was rerouted.
But I have seen a reference that Klein did extend to Oak Hill.
Easterly. Yeah, there's some remnants of a road back between there and Pleasant Grove.
Oh, it went through there.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about it. No.
Yeah, what I had read was the Klein Road came, from the flats, and the farmers would, bring their wagons all the way up Klein. And then at the top of what is now Oak Hill, there was a spring or some kind of watering hole where the farmers would stop and, before they made their way out farther north.
It's a very different place.
I think a resident on Trip Hammer has discovered that spring.
Really?
Well, he's found a well in his backyard.
Huh. Okay.
That's pretty exciting.
May not be that spring, but the location is exactly what you're saying.
To date, I've been referring to the hamlet that we're discussing as Hanshaw's Corners, after the family by that name, who would be so prominent here for a very long time, hence the working title of this talk. But referring to 20th century community corners as Hanshaw's Corners in the 19th century is likely not totally accurate. So I decided to stop calling it that. Hanshaw's Corners, as a 1938 map suggests, could well have been the intersection with Warren Road. Just please bear in mind that what we're presenting today is new research, all of it subject to revisions and updates. The hamlet was here, however, named Hanshaw or not. This piece of what in 1953 came to be called the new village of Cayuga Heights, when it annexed itself to the old village of Cayuga Heights, so-called, formed in 1915, is really the oldest concentration of settlement in the village, which I think is sort of neat. We can't be snooty anymore. I think of that whenever I use the term old village to refer to the less than half a square mile incorporated in 1915. The point I think that, if I may say so, Pat, you and I enjoy making together is this area didn't spring out of a clamshell like Botticelli's painting. In 1915, when Jared Newman and Charles Blood developed a university suburb, it was very much a part of the whole farming area of Tompkins County, within the town of Ithaca and before that, other towns. And it's very, very terrific, I think, to know that. There's great continuity. Research that Pat has done on Pleasant Grove Cemetery bears that out.
Right. That's what I've been thinking about too, is northeast Ithaca, and if you want to call it Hanshaw's Corners, maybe you can. But it was, I'm just trying to think of it as a place in the 19th century and how far the connections might have extended across different towns. So, for example, in Pleasant Grove Cemetery, there are people from Lansing buried in the cemetery, from Danby, Varna, all over the place, Etna, Forest, Donald, Forest. So even though this was a small settlement, sparsely populated, the ties were pretty extensive. I mean, people did go into Ithaca, they considered themselves part of Ithaca in the 19th century, but they also had family ties to Lansing and other areas of Tompkins County. A lot of, we may talk a little bit about this, but a lot of these farm families, they came from New Jersey, they came from eastern New York, Pennsylvania, and they came in family groups. So they would settle in family groups in, particular areas. So, and then they would intermarry and move out. And so I think that's how kind of those family connections and social connections spread out.
New England too. People came also from New England. So,